The barrier to fixing this housing crisis is not economic, it's not technical, it's political. Australia's political system has been corrupted by the power of the banking and property industry. Both Labor and the Liberals pursue policies that either push up house prices or give more money to property developers. Both major parties oppose any changes to the tax handouts to property investors that ultimately put more money in the pockets of property developers and the banks in the form of higher house prices and mortgages, while denying millions of renters the chance to buy a home. Recently, a property industry analyst told The Age newspaper that prices on apartments needed to rise by another 15% before property developers decided it was profitable enough to build. Just think about that for a moment. Because what they are really saying is that property developers are choosing not to build, waiting to push up prices, and that's exactly what they do. Property developers sit on vacant apartments and tens of thousands of blocks of vacant land, only releasing them when the price is right. Property developers and banks will never fix this housing crisis. To understand what has caused this housing crisis comes down to two major changes that happened in the 90s and the early 2000s. First, Labor and the Liberals jointly decided to massively cut funding for public housing. Australia used to build a lot of public housing. In fact, construction of public housing as a proportion of all housing construction went from 16% under Menzies to just 1.8% of homes built in Australia today. If Australia still built public housing the way we used to, we'd have hundreds of thousands of extra genuinely affordable homes, changing the lives of millions of Australians for the better. The second major change was the introduction of the capital gains tax discount by John Howard. This was the massive tax handout for property investors that helped turn property in this country into a lucrative asset, where previously it was a place to build a good life and a good home. Before this, house prices and wages roughly increased at the same rate. After the capital gains tax discount's introduction, house prices increased at about the rate of 2 to 3 times that of wages every year. Over the next 10 years, the Australian government will give property investors $176 billion in tax handouts in the form of negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. The housing crisis we find ourselves in right now is enormous, but we can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. The same policies that have got us into this crisis are the same ones that both Labor and the Liberal continue to peddle. We are told that the best we can hope for is scraps, but I genuinely believe Australia can do better. I believe we are capable of undertaking a genuinely transformational national project to improve the lives of millions of Australians. After all, we've done it before, and countries around the world do it right now. So this is what it would take to tackle our housing crisis. The Greens would start by phasing out the tax handouts like negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount for property investors, denying millions of renters the chance to buy a home. Instead, we'd invest the billions of dollars saved into creating a government-owned property developer to get to work building hundreds of thousands of good quality homes to be sold and rented at prices people can actually afford. The public property developer would save a renter on average $319 a week on their rent and a first home buyer $249,000 on the price of a market home by cutting out the profit margins and building good quality homes for people the way governments used to. These homes would be available not just to the worst off, but to anyone who didn't already own a home. So teachers would be living next door to cleaners, next door to nurses, next door to young families, and next door to people on income benefits. We'd build an institution that everyone has a stake in, just like Medicare. A roof over your head is just as essential as healthcare and education, and we should have a public option to challenge the stranglehold the private industry has over our housing system. For those still renting, we would coordinate new national tenancy standards, including long-term caps on rent increases, longer leases and better conditions. We would create a National Renters Protection Authority to enforce new national tenancy standards, issuing fines to landlords or real estate agents who break the law. Renters would finally have someone they could call when their landlord is doing the wrong thing. Look, we all only live once, but for so many in my generation, the chance of a good life is denied to them. So much of our lives are spent working, paying a huge portion of our income on rents or mortgages, stuck renting forever, moving every couple of years, never able to set down roots, pulling kids out of their local school, or stuck with a huge mortgage, repayments leaving them on the brink of default, or worse, living out of a car, maybe with young kids. I've been told before that I'm too angry, but I am angry about this situation for my generation, and you should be too. Our lives on this planet are brief, and I firmly believe that everyone in this country deserves the shot at a good life, to be meaningful and full of things that matter, time with family and friends, time to go to the beach and be alive in the sunshine. That so many in this country, a wealthy country like ours, aren't afforded these opportunities is something to be mad about. Everything the Greens are fighting for is already policy in countries around the world. Australia used to do it as well. And nothing changes if nothing changes. But in the space of just a few short years, the Greens have secured $3 billion of investment in social housing, the largest investment in over a decade, shifted the public debate to the point where rent caps, phasing out negative gearing and establishing a public developer all enjoy broad popular support. We have given renters a voice on the national stage and seen genuine positive shifts in renters' rights across the states in this country. And we're only just getting started.
Thanks, you two. Now, before I ask the journalists to ask their questions, firstly to you, Max Chandler-Mather, I imagine you're feeling a bit bruised today, given that the Greens' capitulation to Labor on Help to Buy and Build to Rent programs. What do you say to those who you've been campaigning for on the basis of inadequacy that you have rolled over? What do you say to those people, given that what you've done is only delayed help?
Firstly, I would say that it is reasonable to feel terrified and scared about the housing crisis we face. We have a government who is willing to leave behind millions of renters who will never be able to buy their own home, and every day that the government doesn't take substantial action is a sad day. But what I would say is in this term of Parliament, we have secured $3 billion of investment in social housing, 6 times what Labor wanted to spend. We brought Labor to the brink of phasing out negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. They had costed that policy. And if that change had happened, it would have been the most positive and genuine shift we have seen in housing policy in generations. It would have given light at the end of the tunnel for millions of renters right now who have given up on ever being able to buy a home. But the reality is change in this country, especially on housing, is hard and it will take time. And my message to people across the country is have hope. Look at what we have been able to achieve and shift in this country in the space of a few short years. Who would have thought that right now I could be standing here and saying rent caps, phasing out the tax handouts for property investors, establishing a public developer, all enjoy broad popular support. Who would have thought we could talk about the fact that renters finally have a voice in this country? Who would have thought that we come into an election where the defining political debate is who has the best policies on the housing crisis? I have hope because there are millions of people across this country who genuinely want change. And come the next election, they know they can vote Greens to keep Dutton out and put Greens MPs in Parliament to push Labor further and faster on this housing crisis. We will get there. It will take time, but I genuinely believe we can do it.